It begins with a promise we all accept without reading the fine print. When the monitor beeps and the room goes quiet, the person at our bedside will keep us alive. Tonight, that promise breaks. The title on your screen is not an exaggeration. The nurse at the center of this story did not stumble into a mistake. Patterns formed, procedures bent, and lives ended while the paperwork stayed tidy. 8 deaths are confirmed. The true number may be higher. You will hear names, see timestamps, and watch a timeline that looks ordinary until the moment it doesn't. You will learn how hallway cameras missed the most important seconds, how medication cabinets recorded pulls that charts never mentioned, and how a hospital trusted its own routines long after those routines were used against it. This is not a ghost story. It is a ledger, entries, omissions, and the cost of both. We will walk case by case through the nights no one questioned, the alarms that went quiet, and the supervisors who signed off because the forms were complete. Here is the question that frames everything. How does an obsession move from attention to control, and from control to homicide, inside a place built to prevent exactly that? Stay with me. The record is about to speak. It begins in a room that looks like every other ICU room in America. 1 bed, 2 monitors, 3 pumps, a window that stares at a city that never notices. Cook County, Chicago. North Shore Medical Center. The numbers on the screen behave. The night shift settles, and a family tells itself they can rest because trained hands are watching. Within months, that comfort turns into a pattern no one wants to recognize. Otherwise stable patients tipping into crisis on quiet nights. Charts that look tidy while outcomes do not. Administrators call it cluster. Doctors call it an anomaly. Families call it bad luck. One detective calls it something else. Aaron Caldwell is on the roster most of those nights. 7 years on the floor. Commendations for clean documentation. Known for staying late to finish charts. She moves the way experienced nurses move. Sure of the layout, unhurried in the corridor, exact at the bedside. Her patients call her kind. Her colleagues call her thorough. Her badge opens every door that matters. The first death that bothers Detective Mariah Cortez arrives without drama. Evelyn Park, 58, a retired teacher from Albany Park, comes in with a cardiac arrhythmia that responds to treatment. She texts her daughter a photo of the skyline and a line that reads, "Home by the weekend." At 2:11, the room lights brighten. At 2:16, an alarm stops. At 2:23 a.m., code is called. The attending writes a note that is careful and complete. The hospital offers condolences. The family plans a funeral. The file is closed because there is nothing in it that wants to stay open. 2 weeks later, Raymond Ortiz, 64, a hairstylist from Humboldt Park, collapses after walking to the sink. Same corridor, same time of night, same sequence of light, silence, and rush. On the charge board, the names change. On paper, the nights are clean. Detective Cortez notices the minutes, not the adjectives. She circles 2:14, 2:16, 2:23. She writes, "Why this cadence?" in the margin and tapes the sticky note to the inside cover of a thin manila folder that will not be thin for long. Michael Rivera, 46, joins the list you already know. Rogers Park, routine procedure. Discharge in 3 days if numbers hold. He jokes with his wife, Dana, about getting pizza on the way home. He keeps his phone face down. The haptics buzz when she writes sleep. At 2:14, the lights come on. At 2:16, the alarm cuts. At 2:23, the room fills with hands that move by protocol. In the morning, a chaplain waits outside a family room that isn't large enough for the new size of a loss. 3 cases do not make a charge. They make a question. Detective Cortez takes the question to the hospital's safety office and asks for corridor camera clips, Pyxis medication logs, and badge swipe data for the East ICU between midnight and 4, spanning 6 months. The request travels up and down a chain that prefers incident forms to outside eyes. It lands on the desk of Assistant District Attorney Nathan Cho, who signs a narrowly tailored subpoena that mentions times rather than names. The hospital complies because times are neutral until they aren't. There's a way to watch a hallway until it teaches you something. Cortez parks at a desk with 3 screens. One plays the corridor feed at real speed. One jumps in 10-second steps, and one displays a timeline of badge entries, door swings, and cabinet pulls. She does not look for faces. She looks for the shape of nights. In Cook County, Chicago, the shape at 214, 216, and 223 repeats too often to be luck. She calls a data analyst in King County, Seattle, Jordan McKee, who built a tool to sync security video with device logs during a NICU diversion case. McKee lends a script. The script lines up every beep, every swipe, every door, every light. Aaron Caldwell's name appears the way a goodnight nurse's name should. Present, frequent, consistent. It also appears near medication cabinet accesses that do not pair with bedside scans, and waste that ask for a witness line that stays blank. Detective Cortez looks up other districts because patterns travel. The Bronx flagged voids just like these in a case 5 years back. Harris County, Houston, lined up 4-port residue with Pyxis pulls to prove an impossible timeline. Los Angeles County documented alarm mutes at the console, while notes in patient records described quiet, restful night. None of those districts share a staff member or a policy book with Cook County. They share the weak spots all hospitals inherit when trust gets automated. Evelyn Park is not a data point on a slide to the people who knew her. She is a teacher who kept ticket stubs from field trips in a shoebox and sent holiday cards with the same fountain pen for 30 years. Her daughter, Ji Woo, brings Detective Cortez a folder of photos because she wants someone to see more than the discharge estimate. Michael Rivera is not a line in a chart. He is a careful man who folded his shirts the same way every Sunday while Dana read the paper out loud. Raymond Ortiz cut hair for 3 generations on the same block and kept a Polaroid of every first haircut he ever gave. The file swells with names and the things that made those names specific. For years, the ICU called these nights anomalies. A mortality review board used the phrase complex case mix and moved on. A nurse manager admitted off camera that alarm fatigue was real and we all mute sometimes when we're in the room. An internal email reminded staff to avoid personal gifts at the bedside. At least one warning reached an inbox with a subject line that read boundary coaching, and nothing in the file shows it was read twice. If you stand in the corridor and look past the linen alcove, you can see how it happens. The machine demands a scan, the unit demands a minute, the chart demands a story that looks like last night's. One person refuses to file the pattern under fate. Cortez drives across town to Miami-Dade for a conference where a former charge nurse, Lila Rojas, now audits ICU incidents. Rojas points to the overlap, badge readers that log entries the chart never mentions, cabinet drawers that open with no patient scan in the next 2 minutes, alarm mutes that live on a console audit separate from the electronic record. If you want the truth, Rojas says, stop asking what the note says and start asking what the room did. For years, it was called medical anomaly. Detective Mariah Cortez would not sign off. She told ADA Nathan Cho, the next victim is already being chosen. She was not guessing. She had a calendar of nights, a stack of logs, and a 3-minute window that kept returning like a reflex. The crucial piece of evidence that breaks this case is simple and unforgiving. You will see it in full. But first, you need to understand Erin Caldwell's background, the nights she owned by habit, the boundaries she was told to keep, and the small exceptions that became a path. Tonight, we will trace Erin's history from a spotless orientation in Cook County to a probationary period that never reached her personnel file. We will show you the warnings North Shore Medical Center ignored because the forms were complete. We will walk you through the breakthrough Jordan McKee's sync script makes possible when badge, cabinet, console, and bedside are forced to share the same second. And we will end with the interview that shifts from denial to explanation to admission, recorded in a room with a clock on the wall that never stops. If you've watched true crime footsteps before, you know what comes next. No reenactment for shock value. No guesses dressed up as certainty. Only a timeline that either holds or breaks. Stay with me. The names matter. The minutes matter more. The record is about to speak, and when it does, you will see how an obsession turned into murder inside a place built to prevent it. How a hospital in Cook County failed to stop a killer hiding in plain sight, and why other districts from the Bronx to Harris County should review their nights before another 214 turns on a light no one should ever see. Erin Caldwell does not arrive in Cook County as an unknown. Her story starts smaller, in places where a name can be a resume all by itself. Community college in DuPage County, top marks in pharmacology, clinical rotations at a suburban step-down unit where instructors praise her dosage calculations and her composure during mock codes. She is drawn to protocols the way some people are drawn to music. Checklists calm her, alarms focus her. What draws her even more is the feeling of being the person in the room whose decision changes the next minute. Control wrapped in care. Validation dressed as competence. Her first job is a float assignment in Lake County. New nurse orientation, badge photo, laminated 5 rights card on a retractable clip. In those first months, patients request her by name. She is fast with comfort measures, exact with documentation, the kind of nurse who can silence and pump with 2 buttons and a breath. Then a near miss takes a quiet shape. A patient receives an as-needed dose without a bedside scan because the barcode won't read. Erin charts the administration later with the phrasing of someone reciting a policy from memory. The patient is fine. The note is clean. A preceptor writes, "Excellent recovery under pressure," and adds a smiley face. The file acquires its first gentle ripple. There is a travel contract after that, short and forgettable, a winter posted to a rehab wing in King County, Seattle. Night shifts. Erin develops a habit of staying late to finish charts, and her preceptors there like late charts if they are perfect. A patient compliments her for checking in at odd hours, like she knew I needed water before I asked. On a different night, a charge nurse reminds the team in a huddle that gifts at the bedside are not permitted and that professional distance protects everyone. No one is singled out. Everyone nods. The reminder goes into no one's personnel file. Erin keeps a small stack of thank you cards in her locker, rubber-banded, faces inward. Next, a temp agency assignment connects her to a Bronx Med-Surg unit just long enough to learn a set of machines by their sounds. She volunteers for rapid response call lists. Not because she seeks emergencies, she says, but because she wants to be useful. A supervisor notes strong initiative and assertive presence in rooms where decisions are being made. A staff nurse mentions, sotto voce, that Erin sometimes lingers at bedsides after tasks are complete. She's thorough, the nurse says and shrugs. The comment never hardens into a report. The shift calendar turns. Erin moves on. Harris County, Houston, brings her to a high-acuity step-down where the Pyxis cabinets log every touch and the console prints a midnight audit like a cash register tape. One night, the audit lists a partial dispense awaiting a witness that never arrives. The next morning, the witness field carries a name, written within the allowable grace window. Erin explains that the cosign happened at the bin and the system didn't take. The lead accepts the explanation with a warning to get the second set of eyes in the moment, not later. A week after that, a family writes a letter praising Erin for knowing when to check and how to keep Dad calm. The manager posts the letter in the break room. On paper, the letter is louder than the warning. Each step in her work history ends the same way. A kind email about fit, a neutral departure code, an exit interview that credits schedule changes or desire for higher acuity. None of these exits is dramatic. None of them is the kind that anchors a red line under a name. But if you stack them, Lake County's barcode bypass, King County's boundary huddle, the Bronx's lingering presence, Harris County's witness lag, you see not mistakes, but experiments. Places where a rule bent a degree and then bent back. Erin learns which seams hold and which ones tear. She learns where the systems expect trust and how easily trust can be mistaken for proof. Back in Illinois, a supervisor from DuPage writes her a reference that glows. Detail-oriented, calm under pressure, beloved by patients. The words are true in the way many true things are incomplete. She applies to North Shore Medical Center in Cook County, aiming for night shift in ICU. Her application is immaculate. Certifications current, continuing education badges, a penciled-in note about passion for critical care. The hiring board sees a resume filled with movement, that can be explained by contracts and travel. They see commendations. They see no formal discipline. They see someone who wants the highest stakes because that is where she thinks she belongs. Erin gets the badge, the scrub color that marks ICU staff, and the schedule she prefers. For 12s, then a day off. She memorizes door codes, learns names, finds the rhythm of a ward where every second can be justified to a decimal. This is where the testing stops being theory. North Shore Medical Center is a city within a city. In Cook County, Chicago, it sits like a node where 1,000 lines meet. Ambulance bays supply routes, staffing rosters, pharmacy restocks, cafeteria trays, visitors who become families who become names on whiteboards that wipe clean at shift change. Erin steps into this network with the same poise she has practiced in smaller places. Orientation signs off early on her competencies. Preceptors say she gets it. She learns the med room's cadence, the console's menus, the difference between the sound a monitor makes when it wants attention and the sound it makes when it must be obeyed. She chooses nights. Nights are quiet enough to notice small things, and small things are where influence lies. She joins the unit council on alarm hygiene, a phrase that means let's make sure the right sounds reach the right people at the right time. She speaks up about reducing nuisance alerts that wake patients without adding safety. The argument is thoughtful. The policy bends toward her view. Alarms will still call, but fewer will call all at once. Her charting is exquisite. Blocks of time described with measured language. Vital signs nestled beside interventions. Responses recorded within the hour. New nurses asked to model their notes after hers. When a code is called, Erin becomes a fixed point. One person runs compressions, one hangs fluids, one manages air, and Erin records the critical moments in a way that reads like a metronome. Her pen, digital or ink, keeps time. In a ward that reveres order, this is a kind of power. The first incident that matters does not look like an incident. A patient on a vasopressor wean destabilizes and then recovers just after midnight. Later, the Pyxis shows a drawer open and close without a matched bedside scan. The witness field for a waste fills in during the allowable grace period. The console notes a brief alarm acknowledgement before the bedside note mentions quiet environment maintained. No one files a report. Nurses talk about artifact and leads that needed a firmer press. Erin's documentation is precise. The night passes. Another patient declines in a pattern that will become familiar. Light at 2:14. Silence at 2:16. Rush at 2:23. The day after, a family sent a tray of cookies for the angels on the night shift. Erin puts the card in her locker with the rubber-banded stack. In the break room, someone jokes that cookies always arrive on the hardest weeks. Everyone laughs the way people laugh when they need the sound to make a room feel normal again. Erin cultivates presence. She is the nurse who appears when a pump protests, who answers a call light before the second chime, who remembers a patient's daughter is flying in from Midway and asks if she landed safely. The attention reads as empathy because sometimes it is. It also builds a scaffold. She is there, so she belongs. She is near, so she is needed. And near becomes a habit the unit stops noticing. The hospital safety office sends out a reminder about no personal items at the bedside unless logged, a standard policy that slides past inboxes like weather. In a month that follows, 2 separate rooms wake to find small notes with the station number, folded tight. No one asks who left them. It is a kind gesture that requires no paperwork. The line between permitted kindness and flag boundary remains a pencil mark. Detective Mariah Cortez will later call this period the layering phase, skill layered on access, access layered on routine, routine layered on reputation, until no one can point to the exact minute when the structure shifted from support to leverage. She charts this layering across cases. Evelyn Park in Albany Park, Raymond Ortiz from Humboldt Park, Michael Rivera from Rogers Park. 3 neighborhoods, 1 ward, the same cadence humming beneath different notes. Assistant District Attorney Nathan Cho watches the ICU's internal reviews accumulate phrases like complex case mix, comorbidities, and expected risk, words that can be true and still mislead. He signs subpoenas narrow enough to be ignored and broad enough to be useful. He learns how often not documented means not done, and how often it means done in a way that felt reasonable at the time. In courtrooms, reasonableness has edges. In hospitals, it has a long middle. The move to North Shore also moves Erin closer to people who might have stopped her if pieces had landed in one place instead of several. Lila Nguyen, the charge nurse, carries authority over staffing, alarms, and escalation. She is exacting but trusts the veterans who keep nights running. Dr. Patrick O'Malley writes orders that form a spine. He is early to his rounds and conservative with discharges. Both rely on systems designed to make error visible. Those systems do their best work when someone is trying and failing, not when someone is trying and learning, which seams are soft. By the time corridor cameras and Pyxis logs begin to agree on too many coincidences, Erin has become part of the ward's architecture. New hires ask, were supplies live? And people point to Erin without thinking. Breaks get covered, and Erin's name is on more swap sheets than anyone else's because she always says yes. She is present for gratitude and for grief, and presence buys benefit of the doubt in places where doubt costs time. Here is your open loop. On paper, Erin's new start in Cook County looks clean. Orientation signed, competencies checked, commendations earned. In practice, the obsession that pulled her into this work continues to grow. What happens next is not a coincidence. It is a choice made inside a room that understood how its own systems could be steered. Investigators will not see that choice for years. Not until badge swipes, cabinet pulls, console mutes, and bedside scans are forced onto the same second and asked to agree. When they fail to agree, the gap will not be an accident. It will be a map. Evelyn Park's chart reads like recovery. She folds her daughter's scarf and asks to keep it where she can see it when she wakes. Her rhythm steadies. Her color returns. The night nurse writes 2 tidy lines, resting, no distress, and the room lets everyone believe morning is guaranteed. Then the slope changes by inches. Oxygen slips, returns, slips again. Pressure sways and settles. At 2:14, the light. At 2:16, the silence. At 2:23, the rush. The note afterwards is measured and false in the same breath. Decline consistent with underlying disease. In Cook County, inside North Shore Medical Center, a family learns how quiet an ICU can get when words fail. Raymond Ortiz is all habit and warmth. Comb in the back pocket, jokes at the sink, a promise to tip the nurses if they let him steal a coffee he isn't allowed. He is the kind of patient a unit protects by instinct, stable enough to talk about breakfast, vulnerable enough to need constant eyes. His numbers argue with themselves in small ways, and then the cadence returns. Light at 2:14, silence at 2:16, rush at 2:23. The summary praises a swift team response. The obituary praises a man who cut hair for 3 generations on the same block in Humboldt Park. A chaplain stands in a doorway holding a paper cup for someone who can't drink anymore. Michael Rivera is the hinge between names you've heard and a pattern you can no longer ignore. 46. Rogers Park. Routine procedure. Home in 3 days if numbers hold. He jokes about pizza on the way out. The minutes refuse him. Light. Silence. Rush. 3 lives. 1 ward in Cook County. An ICU designed to absorb risk becomes the cover that hides a hand. Detective Mariah Cortez learns how to listen to a hallway. She sits with the East ICU corridor feed and lets the night teach her its grammar. Wheels that complain near the pharmacy door. Shoes that whisper, doors that hush. The pop of a glove at a threshold. Patterns don't announce themselves with trumpets. They repeat until a stubborn mind starts circling minutes in red. She circles 2:14. She circles 2:16. She circles 2:23. She writes, "Why this cadence?" in the margin and builds a timeline that ignores adjectives and believes only time. The method is not loud. It does not require chaos. It takes access and places a fragile body on an incline it cannot climb. No measurements, no lists, no names of substances. That is not what we are here for. It is enough to say that a hand uses a system built on trust and bends a life toward an end that looks, on paper, like fate. In an ICU, changes like these happen every hour. The crime hides inside that truth and counts on it. The hospital responds the way most hospitals everywhere would respond, from Los Angeles County to Miami-Dade, from the Bronx to Harris County, with committees, audits, and careful language. A mortality review board meets. Words appear in summaries with professional calm. Complex case mix, expected variability, appropriate escalation. A memo about alarm fatigue reminds staff to document every mute and to avoid unnecessary silencing. Pharmacy counts reconcile. On paper, the machine hums. At consoles and in break rooms, a few nurses stop meeting one another's eyes when certain nights come up. They check times twice. They keep their voices even in a place that runs on even voices. Sofia Mendez has been on this unit long enough to know the difference between calm and suspension. She keeps lists in pencil and checks them with the side of her thumb. She leaves a 34-second message for the safety office with 4 timestamps and 1 question. Why do these keep matching? A respiratory therapist, Jared Lee, adds a small observation that becomes a direction. The corridor is too quiet just before the rush. Not controlled, paused. Suspense is not proof, but it tells you where to look. Families make kitchen tables into war rooms. Evelyn's daughter, Jiwoo, prints records and pulls a highlighter across any phrase that defers to underlying condition. Raymond's brother writes, "Why here, why now," in the margins. Dana Rivera reads Michael's chart twice, then opens his phone and stares an unsent "love you" that will never become a read receipt. These are not clues. They are lives that refuse to be reduced to tidy endings. Cortez pins 3 other districts to the board because weaknesses travel even when staff do not. Los Angeles County taught investigators to weigh Quiet Night notes against console mutes that lived on a different audit. Harris County proved that a cabinet's pull history could build a skeleton no chart could explain away. The Bronx showed how proximity pings near doorways stitch a path thin as thread but strong enough to follow. None of this names the nurse. All of it tells Cortez where to point the light. Assistant District Attorney Nathan Cho signs a subpoena that uses hours instead of names. Badge swipes, cabinet pulls, console mutes, bedside scans. Midnight to 4 o'clock, East ICU, 6 months. Times don't accuse anyone until they align. When they align, they stop being neutral. The first murders recognized as murders do not look like murder. They look like competence standing in the right doorway at the right second. They look like notes that read like manuals. They look like a hospital trusting its routines until the routines are what need investigating. Imagine being one of the few who can't unsee it. One of the only nurses who hears quiet at the wrong times. Would you risk your place on a team built on trust? Would you risk being wrong in a room where being wrong costs careers? Tell me in the comments what you would do, because the people here had to decide with no promise of backup. Erin Caldwell understands how rooms behave, and she understands how credit is assigned in those rooms. A pump chirps, she arrives, her voice steadies the pace. And Dr. Patrick O'Malley, morning rounds, precise orders, the blueprint of this ward, gives a single nod that counts more than words. For Erin, that nod is currency. It is not romance. It is proof. She learns that if she is present for rescues, the nod comes. And if rescues are rare, presence can become preparation. Small scenes begin to read 2 ways. A monitor lead underperforms. Erin resets it before anyone asks. A pressure bag sags. She corrects it with muscle memory. An alarm cries wolf. She tames it with a setting change inside policy. Each act is exactly what a veteran should do. Each also build a role. When something needs fixing, she is there. The first time Dr. O'Malley watches her solve a problem, he says, "Good catch." Ordinary phrase, ordinary day. The second time, she positions herself so he will see it again. That is still human. It becomes something else when a crisis turns into a stage and the schedule starts to help set the scene. Watch the minutes as Cortez watches them. 23:57, cabinet open. 002. No bedside scan. 013. Console mute with no note praising a quiet environment. 104 and 106. Proximity pings near room 412 without a charted check-in. 214. Lights. 216. Silence. 223. Rush. This isn't a drumbeat. It flexes, it breathes. But it breathes toward the same minutes on too many nights to be dismissed. Lila Nguyen prints alarm audits and lays them over cabinet logs on a desk that has seen a decade of night shift coffee. She doesn't accuse, she aligns. She draws a line where bedside scans should be. She circles where the line isn't. She dates the circles and writes a note to safety. Unusual clustering. Request formal review. The pen doesn't smear. The paper doesn't blink. Inside Erin's locker, a rubber band holds thank you notes. A folded station card carries the unit's number written twice. A committee pin from alarm hygiene meetings sits above a spare badge reel. Tokens like these are supposed to certify intention. In the wrong light, they chart access. Jordan McKee, a data analyst in King County, Seattle, refines the script that forces corridor video to share a second with device logs. It measures delays in frames and gives each event a confidence score for whether a drawer could have been pulled for the patient in the room that minute. Scores are not law. They are questions sharpened enough for court. ADA, Cho knows how to carry those questions into rooms where clocks don't forgive mistakes. Erin's fixation narrows to one witness. Dr. O'Malley, the attending whose orders fit together like teeth in a gear. She mirrors his language. Tolerated. Reassessed. No acute distress. Her notes begin to sound like the ward speaking through her. That is how people become part of a place. The trouble begins when the place begins to move to match the person. There is a night when room 416's pressure rises without an obvious cause. Erin solves it by the book. Dr. O'Malley watches and says the words again. Good catch. In the 2 weeks that follow, similar moments gather near her name. Competence clusters around experts. So do accidents. When both cluster around one badge, the corridor demands a new kind of question. Sophia writes again, longer this time. Times. Rooms. Identifiers redacted. Patterns highlighted. She ends with a line that is half plea, half warning. If I'm wrong, show me where. If I'm right, stop this before another name leaves the whiteboard. She sends it, breathes out, and goes back to work because the ward doesn't pause for emails. The next step Erin takes is not for a patient. It is for the nod. A drawer opens without a scan. A trace wobbles, then steadies. A bedside entry praises swift response to a transient change. Dr. O'Malley signs a plan to continue monitoring and starts first rounds 15 minutes earlier. Those minutes will matter when Cortez rebuilds the morning and finds two paths that can't both be true. Maricopa County, Phoenix, contributes a cautionary footnote to the board. One console logging mutes for an entire pod without distinguishing which doorway justified which silence. Philadelphia adds another. Witness names that became courtesy signatures when a unit was tired. These aren't accusations against hospitals. They're reminders that systems are only as strong as their busiest moments. By the end of these nights, suspense no longer comes from what you don't know. It comes from what the record knows and cannot yet force everyone to see. Drawers without scans. Mutes without notes. Presence without purpose. A nod that lands where it should not. The ward's trust becomes a stage. The cues are light, silence, and rush. And the person standing in the doorway knows exactly when to step into the frame. Hold this open loop. The next step Erin Caldwell takes isn't about the patient under the blanket. It's about being watched by the one person whose approval has become the measure of her nights. That step will leave marks even she cannot sand away. Badge, cabinet, console, bedside. For systems that rarely agree on anything will finally refuse to agree with her. When they don't, the gap they leave won't be an accident. It will be the path out. The first official tremor doesn't come from police. It comes from inside the hospital, from a place designed to prevent embarrassment, not expose it. Lila Nguyen prints her overlays, console mutes, cabinet pulls, bedside scans, and carries them to risk management. The office smells like paper and carpet cleaner and the kind of caution that has its own filing system. She lays the pages down and says the quiet thing out loud. These minutes repeat. These rooms repeat. These names repeat. Risk management assigns a case number and a tone. The tone is calm. A safety analyst, Thomas Avery, asks for broader context. He wants seasonal volume, acuity shifts, and the standard deviation of glucose alarms across 3/4. Lila nods and returns to nights where alarms still go quiet at the wrong seconds. Thomas builds a dashboard that smooths jagged lines until they look like weather. Smoothing is a way to say nothing is wrong if you step back far enough. Then a different kind of number refuses to be smoothed. Glucose crashes. Not the gentle dips that come with missed bites or in 4 paws too long. Sudden plummets that shove a body off balance. The lab flags the trend. The unit hears only the beep that comes after. The chart calls them expected variability in complex patients. The timestamps call them something else, stacked just before 2:14, when lights too often find a switch. A pharmacy reconciliation produces a phrase no one wants to read. Documented waste without witness exceeds baseline. The excess is small, but patterns are born from smallness. Waste logs show blanks where second names should live. The grace window fills a few the morning after. Others stay empty. Each empty field is an invitation to look away. Fill it and move on. Admit it and open a door you cannot close. Thomas schedules an internal huddle. Administration arrives with legal counsel and a prepared sentence. We must be careful not to draw conclusions that expose the institution to unnecessary liability. The sentence is repeated in different suits, different voices. A second sentence follows. Family confidence depends on our steadiness. Steadiness becomes a synonym for silence. A draft memo is written and rewritten until it says almost nothing. It advises reinforcement of alarm hygiene, strict adherence to bedside scanning, and timely completion of waste documentation. It does not name nights. It does not name rooms. It does not name Aaron. It does, however, pause the conversation long enough for another quiet shift to pass. Detective Mariah Cortez doesn't have access to memos. She has access to time. Her timeline thickens while the hospital's thins. She calls Assistant District Attorney Nathan Cho and says the internal process is going to protect the brand. I need the seconds before they become summaries. Cho signs the second round of subpoenas, narrower in scope, sharper in aim. East. ICU. Midnight to 4 o'clock. Corridor cams raw. Pyxis event logs with user IDs. Console audit with operator IDs. Bedside scanner caches pre-sync. Inside the unit, a brave email lands where it cannot be ignored. It comes from Sofia Mendez and carries no adjectives. Only times, rooms, and a line that ends any patience for smoothing. This is the 4th cluster with the same cadence. If we're wrong, prove it. If we're right, someone is going to die on our watch while we contextualize. The word contextualize becomes a wedge. It pries open a meeting that should have happened a month earlier. The meeting does not go well. Counsel repeats the liability sentence. A vice president adds, our ICU outcomes are still within national benchmarks. Sophia replies, benchmarks don't bury families. Lila places a single sheet on the table. 3 columns, 214, 216, 223, filled with dates, initials, room numbers. The sheet sits like a siren in a room that forbids noise. No one signs it. The papers are collected and stamped confidential. The investigation is formalized, which in a hospital can mean slowed until memory goes soft. While the process learns to crawl, Erin Caldwell keeps working. Her badge opens the same doors. The corridor hears the same shoes. Cabinets record the same gentle taps. Console mutes bloom and fade like quiet lightning no one else sees. Families sleep. The war breathes. The minutes try to tell their story. Breakthroughs rarely arrive as speeches. They arrive as small contradictions that refuse to be reconciled. Cortez gets the bedside scanner caches, the raw, unsynced guts of the devices that live in pockets and cradles. She overlays their pings on the cabinet pulls and notices an absence that matters more than any presence. Minutes when a drawer opened and no scanner anywhere on the pod spoke. The absence repeats. Opportunity, not cause, forms the spine of her theory. Stop proving what killed them, she tells Cho. Prove who had the cleanest shot at the moment. Jordan McKee's sync script does the arithmetic a human eye can't. It aligns frames to events and paints confidence bands around what could have happened in a given second. A pattern emerges that is tight enough to feel deliberate. Cabinet access under Erin's login, console mute under an operator ID tied to her console, and a corridor pass that places her silhouette where the blind spot begins. Still, defense will call it coincidence until something hard and human pins it down. That something is found not in the ICU, but in a forgotten satellite closet cut into the wall opposite the linen alcove, a space the architects added years ago to store overflow supplies when a tower wing was under renovation. It has one outdated mini fridge for saline bags that never should have been there and a clipboard for temperature checks no one likes to do. Policy says the charge nurse initials that clipboard every 2 hours. The handwriting on most lines is tired but consistent. The initials neat. LN for Liling Nguyen, MT for a relief lead. On 3 nights that matter. The 215 line is different. Sharp pen, practiced loops, the kind of letters a person who lives by documentation writes without thinking. EC. Erin Caldwell's initials live on the temperature sheet that no one reads, at a time she did not chart being in the closet, on a duty she was not assigned. On one of those nights, her note in a patient record says quiet environment maintained at 2:16. On the same night, the console says alarm acknowledged. On the same night, the cabinet says drawer open at 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 47 seconds under her user ID. On the same night, the closet says temp check complete at 2:15 with her initials against a line that does not belong to her. For systems, 1 minute, 1 signature. Cortez doesn't cheer. She verifies. She walks the corridor with facilities and asks a question that looks obvious only after you hear the answer. Why is this closet never on the camera map? Facilities shrugs. The closet was meant to be temporary. The lens miss is architectural, not conspiratorial. Temporary became permanent, and permanent became invisible. Invisible is where patterns hide. The clipboard yields more than initials. A smudge of ink transfers under light pressure, like someone signed with a pen that had just written somewhere else. The pen in question sits in a cup at the nurse station, a branded rollerball the unit orders by the thousand. It is nothing. It is everything. The kind of detailed defense will call meaningless until a jury hears how seconds behave when a person tries to be in 2 places at once. Cortez collects the clipboard and the maintenance log that hangs beside it, a separate sheet where equipment checks are scribbled by whomever remembers. On a night that aligns with Michael Rivera's decline, a note reads, linen door sticks, lubed hinge. The initials beneath are EC. The time scrawled is 2:20. Erin's chart that night places her in room 416 at 2:20, reassessing comfort. The console places a mute at 2:16. The cabinet places a pull at 2:13. The closet places a hand on a hinge at 2:20. For paths, 1 body, 1 pair of initials on the only piece of paper no algorithm can adjust. ADA, Cho asks what it means in a sentence a judge can understand. Cortez answers without metaphor. She created opportunity, controlled sound, accessed restricted medication, and signed her presence in a room she had no reason to be in during the window of decline. The sentence isn't poetry. It's a bridge across the reasonable doubt the hospital's bureaucracy built for months. Back on the unit, the brave few wait for the other shoe, the one that drops when a name leaves the whiteboard and enters a courtroom. Sofia Mendez reads the temperature sheet copy and sits for a long time without moving. Jared Lee runs a thumb along the edge of the console and asks aloud why they build systems that keep the truth in separate drawers. Liling Nguyen takes the original clipboard into an office and locks the door because she knows what paper is worth once a story tries to erase itself. Erin Caldwell keeps working for 6 more nights while the hospital negotiates with its fear. She signs 3 more charts with perfect grammar and even margins. She smiles at a family and says the line every nurse learns early and means most of the time, "You can rest. We're watching." The line lands like glass. The arrest does not happen on the unit. It happens in a hallway outside a conference room where administrators have gathered to practice a statement that will say everything and nothing at once. Cortez reads the warrant. Erin asks if she can make a call. The call goes to voicemail. Her badge is collected. The corridor does what corridors always do. It allows people to pass through and become smaller with distance. Here is your open loop for what comes next. The signature in the forgotten closet is the mistake the killer never planned for, because obsession watches the places that confer credit, the bedside, the console, the cabinet, and forgets the places that exist only because buildings age and plans change. In the next chapter, that signature meets lab traces, phone metadata, and a timeline a jury can hold in its hands. The investigation has its fulcrum now. The case begins to turn. They do not set a trap with theatrics. They set it with clocks. Detective Mariah Cortez and ADA Nathan Cho design a shift that looks like any other. The difference is what the room will remember. The satellite closet across from the linen alcove is cleared, photographed, and fitted with a motion sensor the building keeps for construction projects. The temperature clipboard stays exactly where it has always hung. A fresh sheet is clipped beneath the used one. The pen in the cup at the station is replaced with an identical rollerball that carries a microscopic, harmless tracer in its ink, a way to separate this week's strokes from last week's. The cabinet in the med room receives no new stock. It receives new math. Pharmacy adds a numbered seal to the drawer Erin Caldwell most often opens on her nights, a seal that registers on camera the instant it breaks. The console audit remains untouched except for one silent change. Its operator IDs will dump to a live monitor in a room 2 floors below, where Cortez, Cho, and a hospital attorney who finally said enough will watch the second stack. Sophia Mendez takes the hardest role. She goes to work as if she knows nothing. She moves through the night with the discipline most people reserve for examinations or funerals. She checks the rooms she is assigned. She avoids the ones that history has taught her to fear. Jared Lee keeps an eye on the console soundscape and marks mutes with a pencil on a legal pad, even though the machine records everyone. Lila Nguyen stands at the station with a binder that looks like staffing, but is not. It is the knight's spine, the one that will let them stand in front of a judge and say, "Look." The sting doesn't require a decoy patient. It requires a real ward and a nurse who believes she cannot be seen doing what only timing reveals. At 23:57, the drawer seal on the cabinet registers a tiny flicker as the camera rolls. The bedside scanners, across the pod, not just in one room, stay quiet for the next 2 minutes. At 0:13, the console shows alarm acknowledged from the East Bay with no note about quiet environment maintained. At 1:04 and 1:06, the proximity pings near room 412 recur like a refrain. At 2:14, lights. At 2:16, silence. At 2:23, the rush that everyone on this floor knows too well. 2 floors below, Cho circles 2:14, 2:16, 2:23 on a printed sheet, even though he doesn't need to. Cortez doesn't look away. The hospital attorney closes a hand over a trembling pen and says, "We are done contextualizing." The arrest begins as an interview because that is how the careful work is done. A small room, 2 chairs, a clock that doesn't have to be there, but is. Cortez lays out the seconds like photographs on a table. She speaks softly. She is not there to perform. She is there to remove any place for a lie to stand. Erin Caldwell asks for water and receives it. She leans forward. She keeps her hand still. She says she was reassessing in room 416 at 2:20. The console says otherwise. She says she signed the closet sheet because Lila was busy. The temperature log shows Lila's initials on the hours around it. Only 2:15 wears Erin's hand. She says the cabinet pull was for a different patient. The bedside scanners say no patient received a scanned administration in the window that followed. Cortez does not argue with adjectives. She returns to nouns and numbers. For systems agree that Erin placed herself where a hand could control sound, access restricted medication, and step into a blind pocket no camera could reach. For systems, and then a fifth, the tracer in the station pin, detectable now on the temperature sheet and on the collar of Erin's scrubs where she tucked the pin after signing. No smear would convict her. The habit of documentation does. The line that breaks the room arrives without heat. Erin says, "I did what I had to, so the unit ran." Cortez does not flinch. "Which unit?" she asks. "And for whom?" Erin watches the clock. Somewhere in this building, a cartwheel squeals on tile because maintenance never quite fixed it right. The confession is not a monologue. It is an erosion. It begins with we all mute when we're in the room. It passes through no one else was paying attention. It pauses that he respects nurses who keep the plan moving. He is Dr. Patrick O'Malley, the attending whose nod became Erin's private ledger. The words that follow are the closest thing to motive this story will offer. I kept control. If I could bring it back, he saw me. If I let it go, no one did. Meaning and intent are not the same. The victims are not a backdrop for a need. Names Evelyn Park, Raymond Ortiz, Michael Rivera do not exist to explain a feeling. They existed, and then they did not. The confession lands not as spectacle, but as weight, the moment when a private obsession becomes a public record, when justice has something to hold. Cortez reads the warrant. The cuffs are ordinary. The hallway is as indifferent as hallways are from the Bronx to Harris County to LA County and back to Cook County. Erin's badge is collected and bagged. Someone from administration is already rehearsing a statement about cooperation and sorrow. Someone from housekeeping will later wipe down the chair in the interview room and not ask what happened there, because work continues whether or not a story ends. For families, this is the only moment that can be called relief. Not satisfaction, not closure. There's none of that here, just a slackening of the knot that years of doubt tied around their nights. The confession is not the end of grief. It is how grief stops having to argue with a spreadsheet. Trials move slowly because truth does not get to skip steps. ADA Nathan Cho presents a case that sounds like a timeline because that is what it is: badge, cabinet, console, bedside, closet. He brings the temperature clipboard and its unnecessary permanency. He brings the tracer analysis that does not care about excuses. He brings Jordan McKee by video from King County to explain how frames align with events and why coincidence stops being a useful word once enough systems refuse to disagree. The defense reaches for the phrases medicine uses to forgive uncertainty. Complex case mix, alarm fatigue, documentation lag, staffing strain. All are true in a general sense and false in this particular story. Cortez answers each with a second that will not move. 215 EC Supply Closet. You cannot be reassessing in 416 while your hand is signing a door no one asked you to open. Dr. O'Malley testifies with a voice that belongs to a man who has learned the cost of a nod. He says he expected documentation to match orders because that is how care stays safe. He says he never asked for quiet at the price it was purchased. He looks at families and chooses respect over defense. The courtroom is not a place for heroes, but it is a place for sentences that matter. Verdicts in Cook County carry numbers. The one that lands here carries names in the silence after it is read. Multiple counts. A life term that will keep other wards across the country from seeing a familiar silhouette step into their blind corners. Sentencing is formal and unsentimental. A judge speaks about trust and the role of a nurse as a guardian, not a gatekeeper. The words sound like policy and like prayer. Legacy is not a montage. It is a list of things that can no longer be allowed to hide. North Shore Medical Center removes the satellite closet from the corridor altogether. Blind pockets vanish under new lenses. Alarm consoles require dual acknowledgement for any mute. Presence in room must be confirmed with a bedside scan within 60 seconds, or the alert escalates automatically to the charge station and then to a mobile device that cannot be silenced without a second pair of hands. Pyxis cabinets no longer accept a witness signature after the grace window. The witness must be physically present and scan in real time, or the drawer refuses to record a waste. Badge proximity data, once treated as a curiosity, becomes part of the official timeline for every rapid response. Night audits no longer smooth. They spike exactly where the minutes demand. The phrase "quiet environment maintained" is retired for one that names who kept it and why. Families receive the right to request synchronized logs, corridor, cabinet, console, bedside, without a court order. No one has to subpoena the truth from a building built on care. Other districts call to borrow the blueprint. The Bronx tightens its console audit export. Harris County installs cameras where architecture once asked nicely to be trusted. LA County rewrites its boundary policy in plain language and prints it on the back of every badge. King County open sources the sync script that helped the timeline learn to speak. In Chicago, in the apartments where they used to live, the families make new routines that do not erase old ones. Jiwoo folds her mother's scarf and keeps it near the door. Raymond's brother finds a place on the wall for a Polaroid of a first haircut that will never get a sequel. Dana Rivera opens Michael's phone from time to time, sees the unsent message, and lets it remain what it is. Proof that love was the last thing a man chose to send into the world. The ward on level 4 changes the way it looks and the way it sounds. Wills don't squeal anymore. The linen alcove is gone. The temperature clipboard exists as a digital prompt that does not permit anyone to borrow a minute for themselves. Nurses still retuck blankets. They still answer call lights before the second chime. They still write notes that say resting, because some nights are exactly that. But now the building refuses to be quiet in the wrong places. Justice, in the end, is not a gavel or a headline. It is a corridor where 214 is just a time again, not a hinge. It is a console that tells the truth without being asked twice. It is a family who can sleep without waking to check a clock they no longer trust. It is a ward in Cook County where a promise broken for years is rebuilt in small, stubborn ways until the fine print is finally printed large enough for everyone to read. The names remain: Evelyn Park, Raymond Ortiz, Michael Rivera. They're the measure against which every new policy is held. When the night grows long and the unit grows tired, someone will point at the checklist and say, "We do it this way because of them." And the building will answer, not with silence, but with the steady sound of care that keeps its promises. In the end, 3 failures opened the door and kept it open. First, the red flags: drawers without scans, mutes without notes, presence without purpose, noticed by a few, excused by many. Second, the cover within the walls: memos that softened hard numbers, meetings that protected a logo more than a life, a pace of context that outlived patience. Third, the delay in the hunt for truth: a slow investigation that treated patterns like weather until a detective made the seconds stand still and speak. This case returns us to a simple promise at the bedside: trust. Trust in a person, in a process, in a place built to keep us safe. It failed here, not because the building couldn't see, but because no one asked all its eyes to look together. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a uniform, carries a clipboard, and learns the seams of a system meant for care. Tonight, those seams were stitched shut, with evidence, with testimony, with the names of the people who should still be here to tell their own stories. Tell me in the comments, where are the biggest missed chances to stop this sooner? Was it the ignored witness lines, the console mutes, the way meetings outpaced action? Your insight matters. And if this investigation kept you watching, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have more timelines to untangle, more promises to test, and more rooms where the truth is waiting to be heard.